ladies and gentlemen, independent Americans around the country and around the world, I am very happy and honored and humbled to have a very special guest joining us, a man that I have known casually, indirectly, in passing, admiringly for many, many years. A guy who I think continues to be a really important voice of reason and conscience, especially in these crazy and dynamic political times, and also just a fascinating human to talk to and interact with and be friends with. The great and powerful Paul Begala finally joins us on Independent Americans. Welcome, my friend.
Oh, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You know, I don't know when we first met, because we've been in passing probably in CNN hallways and other places, but was it maybe when we first got in direct contact, when you were helping my friend Tommy Sowers out?
I think so. Yeah. Tommy, nearly perfect person, heroic soldier, a terrific professor. Now he's at Duke, I'm sorry to say.
Right.
But he ran for Congress. And it did not go well back in Cape Girardeau, Southeast Missouri. He ran as a Democrat. He is a Democrat, and but he gathered a really eclectic group of supporters for a really impossible mission.
Yeah.
And I mean, the
show is called Independent Americans. I wonder how it might have been different if he had run as an independent, because he was a Green Beret, West Point professor who ran as a Democrat in Rush Limbaugh's home district.
Right.
And put up a heck of a fight. But got beat pretty badly, right?
Right. He did everything right, except he picked the wrong district.
Yeah.
They're not going to elect a Democrat in Southeast Missouri.
And in a statewide office, maybe he fares better, right? I mean, now we've got talking, and we're already jumping into this. So much I want to cover. I want to cover, the national political scene. I want to cover the media. I want to cover Biden and how he's doing. Mm-hmm. I'm really excited about getting your insights on the topic we've explored a lot: independent politics in America, unaffiliated, the state of the parties. But bringing it all the way back, I ask every guest, Mr. Begala, where are you and how are you? It's been a wild year. Where are you and how are you and the people close to you after 1 year of this pandemic and everything else?
Well, thanks. I am in the beautiful Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, 100 miles from DC. It may as well be a million. The county where I am sitting, 71% of my neighbors voted for Donald Trump. And I think that's good for the soul. We have this farm. I grew up in a small town in Texas. My wife is an Army brat, but her family were dairy farmers in Wisconsin. So it was always our dream to have a little farm. And when COVID hit, we moved out to the farm full time. And we did two things. We moved out to the farm and we drove to Texas and picked up Nana, my wife's mom, who's 83. And just, people make mother-in-law jokes. She's the joy of my life. My wife and I have been together since we were 19. So she's known me nearly all of my life, and I call her mom. So she's moved in with us, and she's got disability challenges that require caregiving. And so my wife's taken that on, and it's just been great. I feel guilty saying this, but we have 4 boys in their 20s. They come and go, but they come, and we're working the farm. My wife's got chickens and ducks. I've got 2 Texas Longhorn steers I bought as a gift to myself, a couple of goats. Anyway, we're living the dream. We're loving it.
I love it. And for folks that want to watch the video, you are fully adorned in Longhorn gear. You got the polo shirt on and the hat. I had to ask you if you were in Texas because you're so deeply connected to there, and I want to get into that. But you were raised in Texas. I think you come from a Hungarian American family, too, like I do. Right?
Yes, I didn't realize you're Hungarian.
Yep. My grandparents.
Have you been?
Two of my grandparents came from Hungary, and
do you know where?
Outside of Budapest, in a place called St. Goodhart. That actually is no longer there because it got annihilated in the bombings during the war.
Oh God,
this is a crazy story, but we both have that connection.
But I've been back. The Begalas, as they're called over there, came from a little town called Sharash Potok, which means muddy brook, and there's a little creek there, and it's muddy, but it's up by the Slovakian border. There's another little town my folks come from called Shatoraya Wilhel. And that's right on the Slovakian border. They were peasants, and they grew grapes and made wine. And I've been there. I right to where my great grandparents came. My grandmother immigrated, and her family. And it's just beautiful. It's beautiful there.
It really is. One of the joys of my life was I got a chance to take my mother there for the first time. It was the first time she'd been to Europe. She went back to the place where her mother was born. But I think that immigration story And, I love the accent because I hear my Nana in your accent when you say the names of towns, right? And she spoke Magyar when I was growing up in the house, and we had, all the food. But that immigrant experience, I never really appreciated how much it shaped my understanding of America until maybe the last 5 years or so. And that's really, formed like a spine of my understanding of patriotism and country. But I want to get to a question I ask of all our people. Way back, Machine. You're growing up in Texas, and we'll talk a lot about Texas today. What was your first car, Paul Begala?
Oh my God, my first car was great. You're gonna be jealous. It was a 1970 Chevy Malibu, red, two-door, dualed out, that I bought from my high school buddy Stan Brzezinski. His girlfriend Kim kind of came with it. She liked the car better than Stan or me. So I dated Kim for a little while, but I kept the car for a long time. And of course, the car had a name. His name was John Henry. And he was like, for a small town boy in Texas, this was the loudest, pretty fast car, but it was louder than it was fast. Can you imagine rolling up, now that I'm a dad, rolling up in front of a girl's house at age 17? I was working at the hardware store, saving my pennies. And my dad took me down to the First National Bank of Stafford, Texas, where Mr. Broom was the vice president. I still remember sweating bullets. And he loaned me the kingly sum of $1,200. I saved $300. And the car was $1,500. And Mr. Broom lent me $1,200, which I dutifully paid back from my earnings at the hardware store.
That did not disappoint, Paul Begala.
It was a great car. I'd give anything to get John Henry back.
Well, and I love that it has a name. My kids have named my car / truck. All the cars have names, and they've called it Blackjack Thunder is what they've called my car. And all our cars have names. But let me ask you, John Henry, what shade of red was it? Was it like an Alabama red, or what shade of red?
A little browner, had a little more. I hate to say maroon because that's the rival school, Texas A&M. It's a remedial college we have. It's so cute. They're just the sweetest little people. But it wasn't maroon. It was red, but it had a little more of that kind of brown hue to it. And oh my God, that car was just the best.
Okay, so the other question I've got to ask of all of our guests, you're taking a sip also from a Longhorn glass.
Right. Like I'm easy to buy for, Paul.
They should pay you for the sponsorship. But what is your drink or cocktail of choice, Paul Begala?
Oh, definitely Shiner Bock beer. It's a beer from Central Texas. It's only brewed in Shiner, Texas, by the Cosmos Spetzel Brewing Company since 1869. It is the best stuff in the world. It's a nectar of the gods. Occasionally I brew my own. We grow some hops on the farm. My brother-in-law he's an engineer and a genius and a scientist. So he was teaching me how to brew. And once in a while we'll brew some beer of our own here with our homegrown hops. But that's special. My everyday beer, and it is every day. Shiner Bock.
I love Shiner Bock. Every time I go to Texas, it's one of the first things I get. I feel like every time I'm in Austin, I have to go to the Continental and have a Shiner Bock.
Oh my God, the Continental Club. I had some great dates with my wife there, and back when she was my girlfriend. I think. Oh my gosh, we need to take a road trip. My son Billy lives in Austin, and my son Charlie is visiting him there right now, and I have tons of family in Houston and Austin. And I go there as often as I can. I haven't been in a year, but I go very frequently.
I love Texas. I went frequently in my work at IAVA. I probably went to Texas more than almost anywhere else in America. And when we take this show back on the road again, I want to do a live show at the Continental. I want to do live shows in other places. Maybe you can come and join us. But let's stay on the topic of Texas. I want to bounce around a little bit. But what the hell is up with Texas? Texas is such a great place, right? I'm a New Yorker. I have pride for my state. I love Texas, one of my favorite states. But Texas is too great to have such terrible leadership in Cruz and Cornyn and Abbott. And now you've got Matthew McConaughey maybe throwing his hat in the ring. We had Darren Walker on this show. I tried to encourage him to run. But like on a no shit, sir, like this kind of is a reflection in some ways of what's wrong with our politics. Like,
right.
Why can't Texas do better than these three knuckleheads?
That's a great question. First, I have to confess, Darren and I are college buddies. And so we go back 40 years almost. And I loved him then and love him now. And he is one of the most extraordinary Americans. If you had known Darren in college, this is the early 80s. He was straight out of Brooks Brothers. Every day, impeccably dressed. I thought he was a rich kid.
Mm.
His mother used to get hand-me-downs from the rich folks in town and put him in it. And he was, even then, he was impeccably turned out. He was really a uniter. And we weren't terribly divided then, but it was not as bad as today, but still very much wanted to bring people together, and had a great faith in the power of the arts to transform. I was in student government. I was a little more conventional. This is why Darren will never run for office, I promise. He changes the world in, I think, really sustainable ways by being outside the political system, essentially, and leveraging it. But like one of the things he did, how subversive is this? He brought Pagala, a dance troupe, to the student union. And everybody's like, okay, fine, it's dance, whatever. They danced naked. We had naked dancing in the student union because of Darren Walker. It was so great. And and again, he was just uniting. He wasn't a radical. He was like this really lovely, interesting, brilliant guy who was always wanting to push the envelope, because he thought, well, it was not pornographic dancing. It was a very respected dance troupe, but part of their show was without clothes. Anyway, Darren's the best. I'd vote for him tomorrow, but he'll never run. Matthew may, and that would be interesting. But I think what's going on in Texas is it's always been a one-party state. You're talking about a third party or independent. I just want a second party. Mm. Since my son Billy lives there. He was born in 1995. That's a long time ago. He's 25 years old. 25. And in those 25 years, the Democrats in Texas have won 0 statewide elections. 0. Ever. Not for railroad commissioner, agriculture commissioner, comptroller of public accounts, nothing. They're 0 for life in the last 25 years. So I think there may be something wrong with Brand D in Texas. To begin with, my party has to look at itself. They started to become competitive. Beto O'Rourke almost did it, running against Ted Cruz. But then you saw they fell way back. MJ Hagar, a veteran, badass. Billy worked for her. I'm biased. A wounded combat hero, and very much embodies, I think, true independence. She's not like a hardcore partisan,
right?
But she got whipped by John Cornyn, and I think I'm terribly interested in what the Republicans do wrong. I can't affect that as much as what the Democrats do wrong. So I watch the returns, and it's the Rio Grande Valley of Texas, where I've spent a lot of time. I go hunting there. It's the most Democratic place in Texas. Hillary Clinton won these counties by 50 and 60 points, a margin of 50 or 60. Not that she got 50 or 60, she got 80, 85. Biden won them by like 2, 3. It's the biggest collapse anywhere in America. The biggest partisan swing anywhere in America is in the most Democratic part of Texas, gone from Democrat to Republican. Why? I have to say privately, I called Carville. I thought it was fraud. It wasn't. But when you see that big a swing, you think, hey, somebody's cooking the books. I was totally wrong. And I didn't say it in public. I'm glad, because I don't want to make unfounded accusations. But that was my first, because it was so crazy. It was such a fall. No, it was real. So I looked into it. I called Billy, who was working there. I called Karl Rove, who is an old friend of mine, a premier Republican in Texas and maybe in America. And then I got the University of Texas to organize a focus group for me of students and recent graduates of UT Rio Grande Valley. So young people, not wholly represented, but the smartest, youngest people there. And this is what they told me. To a person, my Democratic son, my Republican friend, Rove, these independents that the university gathered for me, they said, first off, the Democrats said they were going to ban fracking. And that's one of the few, it's the poorest place in America. And there's only a couple of ways out: the military, the border patrol, fracking. And you guys were against all 3. Now, I can argue, I know Joe Biden actually wasn't, and but this was the caricature my party allowed to thrive, not just exist. It was like a prairie fire. It went through there. When you denigrate people who put on a badge and risk their lives to secure the border, we have to secure the border, no question. When you insult people who work in fracking, or say, I'm going to ban all of it tomorrow, which is nuts, you drive people away. Then there's a final piece, and I did see those things coming. I did. It's a final piece I did not see. Democrats were a little too sanctimonious and smug about shutting down the economy. Okay, I think we had to do it. I think it saved lives, but it was painful. And I had one young person say to me, my dad risks his life every day anyway. He's climbing up on a hot tar roof. So he risks. So people like me, right, who work at cable television, right? It's easy for me. I can do it from home. I never risk my life. It's not like Anderson Cooper's going to punch me in the face. So we're so removed from their lives that we were not sufficiently respectful of people who were already risking their lives every day. And so an invisible virus was not like the greatest threat in their life.
Right.
And we were tone deaf. I'm not saying we shouldn't have lockdown. We had to save lives, but we were too tone deaf about the pain and too sort of smug and judgmental and smarty pants about it.
So, Paul, we've talked a bit in this show about how Texas, in many ways, is maybe a mirror or a warped mirror into where America is right now, right? It maybe a bent mirror. We could stretch that analogy, but Carville obviously made some comments this week that's gotten a lot of attention, where he said the Democrats have a wokeness problem, right? And you're getting at some of this as well. I think they've got a toughness problem. They've always been losing on national security and defense. Now, maybe they've started to change that with people like MJ Hagar and Buttigieg and Tammy Duckworth. But there's a kind of a core toughness problem that you've been battling, your entire time as a Democrat. I'm an independent. And when I heard Carville, how do you change this? He said they got to pick up the phone. They got to do. What about you changing it by blowing it up? And what I mean is, the Democrats have been kind of middling around the edges, trying to change their messaging, playing with people like Beto O'Rourke. Is it not maybe just swooping in and doing a Trump and saying, hey, McConaughey's our guy. He's got star power. He's got toughness. He's got sizzle. He's got energy. He will be bipartisan. And if they don't, is McConaughey, let's use him as an example, right? Jesse Ventura, so many others. If he runs as an independent, does Texas no longer become a one-party state? Does that blow it up?
It's fascinating. Matthew's a friend of mine. He's a very smart guy. He's a brilliant actor. He loves Texas. I honestly don't know if he's going to run. I have no idea. And I haven't talked to him about it. But maybe we like double conditionals in Texas. He could pull it off. I can't see anybody else doing it. It's, I think, sort of a lightning strike, the way Schwarzenegger was in California. California doesn't elect Republicans, but there they put, and by the way, he was a very independent, progressive Republican.
Yeah. And
I don't live there, not my state, but I think he did a good job. He seems to be a good guy. I don't know him, but that kind of much less partisan, but still, unifying, not dividing, but not judging. Right. Maybe, but he's going to have to flesh out this is like the fundamental problem though, with an independent political movement, is that some of us are like me. I'm a Democrat. I'm not an independent. I'm not even a little independent. Now, I have in my life voted for a Republican. I voted for John Warner once, was former Navy Secretary, great guy.
Good man.
And a Republican senator. He was just a fine man and a great senator. But in the main, that's the only one I can think of. Maybe by accident, I hit the wrong button. But I am a Democrat. And of course, there are people who are Republicans that way, who are just really hardcore partisans. That doesn't leave very much in the middle. I know people say, if you do a poll, everybody says they're independent, like 45% or something. Yeah, but how do they vote? We just had 93% voting for either Team D or Team R.
Well, let me ask you this, Paul, if I can, right? What we're seeing is, 40% plus of the country calls themselves independent or unaffiliated, a growing percentage. A lot of folks are leaving the Republican Party now. For a long time, folks have said America's kind of a center-right country. Maybe now it's a center-left, but I think you have a center. And McConaughey could be not unlike Trump. I mean, Trump was independent unto himself. He had his own movement. He had his own brand. He blew up the system. So are they both?
And Trump tried to run as an independent a couple of times and failed.
But they both go back to the default, because you can't run as an independent unless you're independently wealthy, unless you're Bloomberg or Forbes or somebody like that. But does that change with other X factors like celebrity or like unity? If you run McConaughey and The Rock and Oprah and 5 or 6 other people, and they all say, screw the parties, and they're able to independently fund, and you've got campaign finance reform, and you've got ranked choice voting, and you've got public financing. Do all those things come together to create more viable candidates? Somebody told me once, Paul, if you run a vet, a cop, or a coach, it gets you 5 points in a congressional election. Now that was probably a while ago, right? Before cops and other folks had different brands. But there's that populism, right? That maybe is stronger than ever before. So is that another way that it could get blown up? If Colin Powell had run as an independent, there are other examples along the way. If a couple of them get together at this moment, does that blow this up in a way it hasn't been blown up before?
No. No, it's like people say they're independent, but they don't vote independent. It's like I could say I'm a vegetarian, I'm a vegan, and feel virtuous, but my ass is going to Whataburger.
But is that because you don't have the option, right? If McConaughey's on the ballot, right, and you have an option, like a lot of folks are independent because they're none of the above, and you guys have been great about recognizing the flaws of the Democratic brand now. Republican brand has got a problem right now. Ooh. It's not an option in most places to even vote for an independent. If there is that option structurally, and
just because the market's not there.
Okay.
I believe I'm an institutionalist. Okay. Yeah. I'm a proud citizen of the oldest democracy in the world, a proud member of the oldest political party in the world, a faithful member of the oldest Christian religion in the world. I've been married to the same girl for 31 years. I'm an institutionalist. Okay. That's me. That's how God made me. That's how I'm wired. That's how I choose to live my life.
Right.
And most people are not that way. Okay. I understand that. I really do. But parties, I've worked all around the world. I've worked in multi-party democracies, and they flourish and they thrive. They drive me crazy, but they do work. So I'm not saying it's an impossible model. They seem to work better in parliamentary systems, if you ask me. Israel, but even there, Israel can't decide what they want to do. They got like 20 parties. So I don't know that fixes everything, but parties can remake themselves. This is where independent pressure matters. Okay, I'm in a couple of weeks, I'm going to turn 60 years old. When I was born, the Democratic Party was the party of segregation. It was the party of the Ku Klux Klan. It was the party of lynching. It was the party of the most evil forces in American history. My party, my beloved Democratic Party. Guess what? In my lifetime, we elected Barack Obama. Parties can change. Okay, when you go from the party of being Bull Connor to the party of being Barack Obama, something's happened. And so I believe parties can revivify themselves. They can change. The Democrats are going through this right now. In some ways, wonderful. In some ways, not. The wonderful ways is they are really embracing the diversity of America and its richness. And this is something my right-wing friends don't get. They think that I'm for diversity because I'm politically correct or guilty. I'm none of that shit. Okay, I'm not guilty about shit. And as you know, I'm a gun-owning, faithful Christian who loves the diversity of America. Why? Because I benefit from it. Okay, but I just had a doc cut a precancerous thing off my face. He's from Iran. I just had a dentist do my checkup. She's from Brazil. The lady across the street from me, who was one of my dearest friends, she was a boat person, came from Vietnam. They were set upon by pirates. She literally had the clothes on her back. You know what? She graduated first in her class at the University of Virginia. She's a freaking genius. I win from that diversity. That's what's great about the Democrats. Yeah. Okay, they've embraced that.
I get that, Paul, and I've been long an advocate of the military is no better example of why diversity is a strength, right?
Right.
But back to a core question. Yes, it's changing. Yes, it's changed. You're 60 years old. Is it changing fast enough for this America? Right? Because the 25-year-olds may not be willing to wait that long, and they can get 95 things, 90 different kinds of the same chair on Amazon, but they only have one candidate to choose from. Is the earth moving under the parties in a way that they are slow to recognize? Because, and let's talk about, an increasingly independent part of this country, white men don't feel like they are welcome in the Democratic Party. Many of them that are, left of center are not happy in the Republican Party. So that, and especially when you talk about national security issues like that, there is a political jump ball that exists. And it seems increasingly young people aren't willing to wait. So does that kind of create a different level of urgency and different opportunities, especially at the local level, where they don't have to pick a party, or you go to a place like Maine, right, where you have different structures?
Yes, and I think that's great. And then the parties then either adapt to that or they die.
Right.
Okay. Ross Perot got 19% of the vote. 1 out of 5 Americans voted for Ross Perot. You know how many electoral votes he got? 0. Not a single one. So he effectively really got nothing. But what he did was pressure the winner, Bill Clinton.
Yeah.
Perot was a hawk on the deficit. And Clinton was a little more moderate on the deficit. He promised to cut it by half. Guess what? He eliminated it entirely, in part because he was persuaded it was good for the economy, but also it was good politics. He wanted to eat into that Perot vote, and he did. Second time Perot ran, he got half as many votes because Clinton had kind of taken his half back. So they can have independent movements, independent candidates can have a salutary effect. But Teddy Roosevelt might have been the greatest politician in American history. He couldn't win as an independent. Okay, so if he can't,
yeah,
Matthew
but
can't,
I appreciate the examples, and I want to do like a series just on this with you, okay? Because I've been so looking forward to having you here to talk about this because of your mastery and because of your experience. But maybe it's the wrong goal, right? It's like, is Evan McMullin winning the presidency the right goal, or is it having all your local mayors be independents? Right? Having your judges be independents, like starting with the grassroots, starting locally, because all politics is local, right? And maybe this will transition into where we are with Biden, because I think we've got maybe the most moderate person since Clinton, right? And maybe the most progressive policies and agenda since FDR. Right. This is a moderate who's going to get through COVID, probably get through infrastructure. He's going to introduce pre-K nationwide this week. So, there's a really interesting moment happening with a progressive guy, with a moderate guy who might be the last moderate we see for a while, or he might be the future for the Democrats. We don't know. But can you step back and objectively evaluate Biden's first 100 days? Tell us what you think for America, not as a partisan, but as a guy from Texas, a father of 4. Evaluate his first 100 days and this speech this week. We know what he's going to say. We know what he's going to do. Can you break that down from your perspective, please, Paul?
Yeah, he has been remarkable. And, I voted for him. Obviously, I'm a Democrat, and I've known him a very long time. But even I, who supported him, thought he would be a transitional figure. Instead, he's been a transformational president. And I didn't see that coming. And I think it's exactly what you say, Paul. He reassures moderates with his demeanor and his respect, his empathy, his caring. And he excites progressives with his agenda. I think it's not for nothing. Here's my bias, and I do have my biases. He's the first Democrat who's been president who went to a state school since Lyndon Johnson.
Wow.
Okay. And I love President Clinton's my hero. He went to Georgetown, he went to Yale, Barack Obama went to Harvard and Columbia, and they're all great. And I love everybody. I respect those schools. I have tremendous respect for those schools. But you learn something at Delaware, in Newark. You learn something in Austin. You learn something in Ann Arbor. You learn something. Fritz Mondale just passed away. He went to the University of Minnesota. And there is I hate to
went to school on the GI Bill, right?
Right.
And you also got Biden as the first president who's had a child in combat in a generation.
Right. And so he is rooted in the non-elite America. In a populist time, that's important. So he has an authentic sensibility. My hero, President Clinton, he used to say this. His father died before he was born. His mother went to study nursing so she could support the family, and left him with his grandfather in Hope, Arkansas, where he had a little general store. It's the only person in the segregated town who would serve Black people and white people equally, was Bill Clinton's grandpa. And Clinton used to say, my grandfather never finished high school, probably never went. He said, my grandfather taught me to look up to the people other people look down on. That's what the Democratic Party needs. It's the Republicans need, but I'm not a Republican. Too many Democrats want to look down. You talked about those white men. Okay. We want to be, too many Democrats are more comfortable in the faculty lounge than the factory floor. Okay. And I come from a different Democratic Party. My parents, we were certainly not poor, but we were right in a beating heart of the middle class. My old man sold pipes and drill bits and stuff. He was a salesman in the oil patch. My mother never even went to college until her 5th kid went. She raised 5 kids and then she started college. So I come from those folks. And my little town, Sugar Land, Texas, was really right-wing. Our congressman was Tom DeLay for 20-something years. So I grew up with people who today have a Trump flag in front of their house. And I love them. And that's like one of my tests. This is where I think your movement is really important. I want more independent voters rather than nonpartisan candidates, right? In other words, my test is, You have to know, respect, and yes, even love someone who voted the other way. Okay, if you're a Trump person, you can't tell me, I love this cousin of mine. She voted for Biden. You know what? I have a lot less respect for you. If you're a Biden voter like me, and you can't say, my neighbor across the street still got his Trump flag up. I love that guy. Great guy. Then you're going the wrong way. I think the problem, put too fine a point on it, is not partisanship. It's tribalism and negative partisanship. Okay, so if you, only one of my 4 boys went to University of Texas, I'm sad to say. But if you ask any of them, one went to William and Mary, one to UVA, one's still at James Madison, JMU. You ask any of them, even the ones that didn't go to UT, what time is it? They say, Daddy, it's 1:45 and OU sucks. Because Oklahoma sucks.
Right.
Well, that's negative partisanship, right? They're not just for Texas, they're against Oklahoma because OU sucks. Well, I save that for something really important, college football. I don't squander that on politics. I mean, this week I went on Anderson Cooper's show and praised Liz Cheney. Now, I don't agree with Liz Cheney about anything. I didn't agree with her father, her mother. If she had an Aunt Trudy, I'd disagree with her. But she did things that I thought were patriotic, standing up to the insurrectionists and the white supremacists. And I have to admire that because her state, by the way, is the most Trumpian in America. So you have to be willing, even the most partisan person has to be willing to set that down. But I think what will move them is if more independent voters, if more voters decide, I'm not just going to be anti-Pelosi or anti-McConnell.
Yeah.
I'm going to be for something.
Yeah, that's what, I've been saying a lot, the most powerful party in America right now is no party at all, right? And we are a group of people that are not necessarily united on much, right? Maybe we're united on a strong national defense, or maybe things that people aren't thinking about, like legalization of marijuana, things that issues that folks are not necessarily really fully comprehending that might actually unify huge groups of people. But I've said that I think this is an important time for Democrats, and especially Biden, to communicate to the hardest right people, the folks that are likely to be converted to extremism, to the oath keepers to take the hill, because it's kind of like Iraq after Saddam's gone. You got diehards, and you either give them a job or they have their gun. And if you don't give them an opportunity to be a part of the future and let them know that they are valued and there's an off-ramp to extremism or an on-ramp to the future, then we're in a tough place. So I wonder, as we have Biden roll out the infrastructure bill, which I think is maybe the most important thing in that whole thing, I would rather have an infrastructure bill to fight extremism than anything else, because you give them opportunity, let them build a bridge, give them a way up to be a part of the future. But the question remains.
Well, I've heard you say this, Paul. Set down your gun and pick up a shovel.
That's it. It's worked since the beginning of time, right? But the question is, can we message that from the Democratic Party? And I don't know if Joe Biden and Pete Buttigieg are the future of your party, or if AOC and other folks are the future of your party. And that messaging collision is what makes me feel like, you, Carville, they want to kick you guys out too and drag it further to the right. So if I'm going to ask Karl Rove if he ever comes on my show, right? Why should I be a Democrat? I'm not a Democrat. I'm unaffiliated. Let's say I'm 18 years old or I'm 80 years old. Right. Why do you think right now someone should choose to be a Democrat and not stay unaffiliated?
Because the Democrats have always been and always will be the party of the strivers, right? The party of the little guy, the little gal, the working person, who Bill Clinton called the forgotten middle class, right? That's always been, we created the middle class, the Democratic Party. Right? We created the weekend, unions did, but Democrats passed the laws that actually said, no, they can't work you 7 days a week. It's always been that. We are the engine of upward mobility. And you have to have that ladder to climb on, right? And I told you about my grandmother from Hungary. She landed at Ellis Island. She didn't have a nickel in her pocket. She never got past probably 4th or 5th grade in school. But she knew she wanted to be free. And, she lived to see her son, my daddy, go to college and be a salesman, her grandson go to law school and advise the president. Well, and I got to take her to the Oval Office, and President Clinton couldn't have been nicer to her. Well, my obligation then, what do I owe for that unearned blessing? People nowadays call it privilege, and I understand that. I'm a person of faith. I consider a blessing, which is more powerful and unearned. What do I owe? Well, what I owe is the granddaughter of the next immigrant maid, who's got the same language skills as my grandmother and the same education level and the same dreams as my grandmother. It is the Democratic Party through public education, good jobs, treating working people with dignity, opening up the doors of opportunity to previously hated minorities. Those things are the engines of the American dream. Those things are why we have a Democratic Party. There's my commercial.
No, I think it's a question that I think is really important for anyone who decides to pick a party to answer. Why am I here? Right? Like, why did I choose to fly that flag? Because at a time when the symbolism is being hijacked in so many different ways, right? The American flag is perceived differently than it was 20 years ago, right? Especially among young people. Like I'm finding a lot of people who are having a hard time flying the American flag, and I'm trying to convince them to take it back and say it's your flag, it's our flag, it's the flag that
I wear a flag lapel pin on my suit every single day that I'm on television, every single day that I go anywhere. And I did have one guy, just some guy, as an airport or something. It's like, what are you on the other side now? Because he's a liberal.
Right, but that's the problem. Right?
My father was buried under that flag.
Yeah.
Are you kidding?
And that's the problem with where we are right now. But I guess I want to just pin one more piece on this if I can, Paul. That's a great case for what Democrats have done before, right? And I don't think any Republican is going to say they're not for the little guy, or they don't want to support upward mobility, or that's what they both strive for, and they're going to pick the points on the board from the past. But both parties are going to be defined most distinctly by their leadership. So when you look beyond Joe Biden, if you got to pick one person to be the brand, who's it going to be?
Oh gosh, I can't pick just one. I mean, obviously the vice.
You're going to be in that room, man.
The vice president. No, the vice president is the first among equals, right? Okay. She's got the support of the president, the support of the party. I'm not saying she's running for anything else, sure, but I think she's serving very ably right now. She's impressed me. She ran a terrible campaign.
She did.
Guess what? So did Joe Biden when Barack Obama picked him.
She did. Yeah.
Joe ran twice before, never got a single delegate.
Right.
So I don't think in fact, I think it's a good thing. One of my early mentors in politics was Governor Bob Casey, Robert Patrick Casey Sr., the governor of Pennsylvania. And he had run 3 times before and lost. And all the smart guys and the Ivy Leaguers used to call him the 3-time loss from Holy Cross. And Casey embraced it. He used to say, you know what? The view from the canvas is highly educational. I've been knocked on my ass. You bet I have failed. And if you have too, I'm going to be in your corner. I'm going to help lift you up. So anyway, the fact that Kamala ran but I want to watch and look at that field. Joe Biden won in the most impressive field I think Democrats have ever put on you've talked about now Secretary Buttigieg. If you looked at Senator Sanders, Senator Warren, from, coming from the left, if you looked at Michael Bennett, who ran his senator from Colorado, is much more moderate. Steve Bullock, the governor of Montana at the time.
I get that, sir. But also, I think Democrats were a lot more impressed by that field than everybody else. Like, with all due respect, right? Like it was a diverse field. There were many viewpoints represented, but I still felt like you had a couple of number 8 and 9 hitters in that lineup that weren't, they weren't murderers row. Right. And I keep looking at how many leaders are still on the sidelines. Right. Like our friend Wes Moore was on this show. Mm-hmm. I hope he runs in Maryland. He, in my opinion, is a once in a generation talent. There are a lot of folks that are still on the sidelines that I think, 5-10 years from now that have been working in Katrina. They've been in Iraq and Afghanistan. They've been on the front lines of COVID. I think there's like a second tier or third tier coming that's really going to impress us. Kind of like the World War II generation that came home that just frankly has been through more shit than this generation of leaders. So I'm looking forward to that. But let me ask you a couple key questions I ask every guest, because I don't want you to miss these. I ask everybody, the show used to be called Angry Americans. We say if you're not angry, you're not paying attention. You're a guy who channels anger and other emotions and puts them into positive impact, but you have a beating heart and you're an emotional guy. Paul Begala, what makes you angry?
Bullies. Bullies, Paul. I fucking hate a bully. Excuse my language. It's the worst thing you can do. Here, I have been blessed, and I've been. I used to start every day in the Oval Office. I've literally been near the pinnacle of power. And when somebody uses power to hurt a vulnerable person, and there's people who have microphones like you who do not use it the way you do to bring people together, to bubble up new ideas, to bring unconventional voices in. They use it to bully. And I hate it. And I just hate it. All my life, I've hated a fucking bully. And that's the worst thing you can do. If you have gifts from God, if you have blessings from God, if you have power from people or even from the Almighty, and you use that to harm vulnerable people, you're scum.
I really appreciate you saying that. So let me ask you a general question. There are still a lot of bullies out there.
Yep.
And a lot of them have microphones. You used to have a show with Ollie North.
I did.
So I don't know if anybody was a bigger asshole to me on public television than Oliver North.
Is that right?
Absolutely. I think I was on Hannity and he was guest hitting for somebody, but like consistently he had me on the show and he would be an asshole to me. Right. And just that was my experience. Right. But there are a lot of folks that are rude, that are disrespectful, that are pushing misinformation to the point where 40% of the Marines won't take the vaccine. How do we combat that? I mean, change the channel, yes. Get Fox News out of the Chow Hall of the Marine Corps, yes. But every time I go to Twitter, I'm like, what asshole are we all talking about now? It's because one asshole left, the biggest asshole of all. Now this swarm has to just talk about another asshole. How do we move past the obsession with giving these bullies so much oxygen?
Right. I don't know is the honest answer. I think there was a hearing in Capitol Hill this week about the algorithms. These algorithms feed the dark side. Now we're all wired to process negative information more rapidly. You know this from the military. Okay, if you're walking along on patrol and there's a little lovely butterfly over there, but then there's perhaps an insurgent over there, I know where your eyes are going to go, Paul. Right? That's how we're wired. That's why we're the dominant species. And so I accept that and I embrace that. But the algorithm, though, takes that negativity to a completely different level. I tried an experiment, Paul. I've never been on Facebook in my life. They could abandon Facebook tomorrow. I'd be happy. I couldn't give a rip. But I'm on Twitter. As you know, we follow each other on Twitter. And I'm a reasonably active tweeter. And so I did something. My wife is the best person I know. And I believe me, I've talked to God about this. And he's told me the only way you're getting into heaven, Begala, is if your wife gets a +1. She's that good. So Diane had this interesting idea for Lent. We're Catholic. I always give up something, cursing, which I love, drinking, which I love, and sometimes Twitter, which I love, even though it's bad for me. All three are bad for me. This year, she said, here's a challenge. Post something positive on Twitter every single day. So every single day for 40 days and 40 nights, I posted a tweet that began with 3 words. People are good.
I saw that, yeah.
And here's an example. Well, during the impeachment trial, I tweeted things that I thought were relevant about why I thought Trump was guilty. And it would get like 50,000 likes. I got like 250,000, 230, I think, 230,000 followers. So that's a big deal for me. But that's wholly negative. I think it's valid opinion, but it's a negative opinion. Trump's guilty, and here's why. During Lent, I rarely got 100 people to like any of these good news stories. And it wasn't just me blandly saying people are good. It was about kids in a school who chipped in and bought a car for their janitor, right? It was about a Girl Scout troop in Des Moines who formed themselves living in a homeless shelter and then set the record for selling cookies, right? It just is there. I believe people are good. I really believe it. I especially believe Americans are good. And so I wanted to highlight that. And so I called a buddy of mine, Bill Burton. He was President Obama's spokesman, a brilliant guy and really knows media far better than I do. And he follows me on Twitter. We talk every day. He said, I haven't seen it once. I haven't seen any of them. I said, why? He said, because the algorithm is not promoting it. The algorithm doesn't want you and Bill and my other friends to see good news about strangers.
Right.
And so I think that's part of the problem.
I think that's right. I mean, I appreciate that because I've been using the hashtag look for the helpers.
I love that.
Trying to highlight helpers, right? Folks that are courageous and going into the fight. And, I've also been, using the hashtag our enemies are celebrating. Every time Trump would do some dumb shit that would expose our national security, I try to do that. But I think you're right about that. And I've been trying to add light to the contrast to heat. I think every one of us can make that conscious choice to fight the algorithm, fight the instinct, and try to add light, especially now instead of heat. But let me ask you to build on that with the question I ask of all of our guests. You're a guy who has positivity. You've been through a lot, political fights, personal fights. You're on TV interpreting all this madness for America. Paul Begala, what makes you happy?
Oh, my sons. I have the best kids in the world. Everybody loves their family, and I know that, and I respect that. But man, you'll meet them someday. Each one, I'm like 5'8". Each one is 6'1" to 6'3". They're giants, and they're beautiful, and they're brilliant. They're all getting into politics, Paul, in different ways, but they're all getting into public service or politics. And they, your kids are still little. And when they're little, it's all like you giving to them. And it teaches you selflessness. It gives you, I think, a hint of a shadow of a window of the perfect love that God has for all of his children. And it's hard for me as a human to imagine that. Like, much as I love them, that's how much God calls me to love everybody else. So it teaches you about selflessness. It teaches you about patience. But then they cross this Rubicon. They become young men. All four of my boys in their 20s. They're a lot smarter than me. And they're smarter than me about politics, which I've spent my whole life in. I've taught for 20 years. They're really smart. I call them. I told you, like, I wanted to know what happened in Texas, and Billy had to explain it to me. They're more technologically proficient, obviously, but they have deep keel, and they care desperately about, especially racial justice. They grew up in the DC area. Their high school was about a third African-American. They all went to Gonzaga, the Jesuit school on the hill. In fact, I introduced you to my son, Charlie, one time.
The IAVA office was right across the street from the football field. We used to talk about that. I remember. Yeah.
Yeah. And I ran into you at the All-Bone Pain there, right next to
Gonzaga. I could see them practice from the old window of the IAVA headquarters.
Then you saw two of my boys were football players, two were baseball, and one was a rugger. But that school required service, and it required service first in the community. And it's the only school in America with a soup kitchen in its basement. So they had a lot of African-American friends, and I grew up in an integrated school and in an integrated town, and their perspective, I heard your conversation with Bartundi. Their perspective on race is so much deeper and richer and more sophisticated than mine. And so they teach me. That's what makes me happy, is that I have these very nearly perfect boys entirely because of their mom. I said, Army brat, MBA, squared away. They're the reason that those kids are so great. And she's the reason they're so tall. My wife's like 5'11". I told the priest in the pre-Cana ceremony, he had us write a sheet of paper what you want out of this marriage. And I was really surprised. My wife, then girlfriend, was writing adventure and all this stuff that I didn't really think, because she's the stable one. And so I thought, well, that's good. I can give her that. I can give her instability. And I wrote one thing, and I filled the whole sheet of paper: tall kids. And the priest is like, this is not a game, son. I said, Father, if that woman gives me tall kids, I will never leave her. And she's done it. She's fulfilled her. But so anyway, I could go on and on. We will go to Austin and hang out with my boys, and you will love them.
I love Austin so much. My wife thought about moving there for a while, and there's a lot about, I go to Texas all the time. I have so many dear friends there. And I feel like, to the outside of Texas, in liberal America, people have this terrible idea of Texas in the same way some folks in Texas do of Democrats. But maybe, that whole insight is an insight into the road forward. And you've been an incredible voice for really a whole generation. Like, I grew up watching you and learning from you and being inspired by you. And I think there's a point that I want to make sure I recognize, which was your kindness. You've always been very kind. Thanks. You've always been very generous. You've been supporting folks who are trying to make it and trying to make an impact. And that's a kind of service that is very noble and very needed right now. And I'm grateful for it. I wish we could do this in person, but I'm going to present you some gifts virtually, right? We used to do it in the Classic Car Club, so we'll take a rain check on that. I got some, I don't, you probably won't wear it, but I got Independent Americans gear.
Great.
Okay. We got new gear. You can rock the eye. I got the shirt on. I had the hat last week. We've also got the Righteous shirts that are kind of
love that
and cool.
Yeah.
Those in Austin. We've got some Uncle Nearest, the finest Uncle Nearest small batch whiskey coming your way. The greatest.
I'll share that with Carville.
You definitely. And then come on my show after you finish the bottle.
He'll definitely do it. Yeah. For that.
Carville joins us soon. And then the gift is a question. We just passed Easter. I know you celebrated Easter with your family. But there are 3 colors of Peeps here: pink, yellow, blue. Paul Begala, which color Peeps would you pick and why?
Oh, you got to go blue. I'm a Democrat. See, I'm not an independent. I'm a Democrat. I'm going with the blue Peeps.
I love it. I love it. I am so grateful for your friendship, for your contribution to this country, for your stories, man. I hope they do like 5 more movies about you guys. It'd be great if they got you guys with the War Room. Is that the film that the iconic
Yeah.
film, right? With so many of y'all, they're doing so many different things now. It would be kind of cool to do a War Room reunion. Have they ever done that?
Oh, in the past, but people
And
have
film
always
it.
done
Like
it.
after you have a bottle, have this bottle, and then let us shoot it.
I would say I'm proud of the work I did. I think you and others are leading us into a new greatest generation. I mean that. I look at my kids, these service members. I have 2 of my very best friends, and I won't say who, 2 very powerful politicians, and their sons are both on active duty. One's in the Marine Corps, one's in the Navy. You're leading something really important, Paul. And this generation, particularly the young people you talk to, particularly those who are first responders and service members, they're the greatest generation. I mean it. They're part 2 of the greatest generation. They're more public spirited. They're less partisan. Like they're not like me. They're more like you, but they're more public spirited. They're more selfless. They're more respectful of others. I just think the worst thing I can say is that some of them are a little too PC and empathetic and, the pronoun police and all that shit. Okay. If that's the worst thing you can say is that they're overly concerned with not hurting people's feelings, that's pretty great. So I think we're watching something. As I turn 60, I'm more optimistic now than I ever was when I was working in the White House or any other time, because I see what's coming. I really do. I dread what's happening and I hate what's happening, but I see what's coming. And I'm not kidding. My sons, your little guys, they're going to save us all. And you're going to be a central part of that, Paul.
I love that. I share that optimism. I think there is a next greatest generation, after 9/11, experiencing the pandemic, the war on terror, the insurrection, all of this, like it's stealing them for the future fights. And that's the silver lining in my view. So I do think, they're the next greatest generation. America is a team game and we're all in it together. You're in the Hall of Fame. The draft is coming up, the NFL draft, which I think is like one of the greatest American things to watch these kids. And the draft is this weekend. So we're going to see a new generation of leaders on the forefront, but you're continuing to support a new generation of leaders. I wish you'd run for something in Texas. Anybody other than these guys, please. I'm an independent, but I'd vote for you if you ran against Ted Cruz. But until then, we're going to look for you on CNN everywhere you are. People should follow you on Twitter and follow the good stuff. If you see the good stuff he posts, like it, share it. The great and powerful Paul Begala. Thank you so much for joining me, my friend, here on Independent Americans.
Paul, thanks a lot. Hook 'em.
Stay vigilant. Thank you.